Hello and welcome to the CX Files for February 9th, 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Hi, Mark. Peter Ryan here, coming to you from a very cold Montreal, Quebec, but it is actually getting to the point where light is at the end of the tunnel. Spring is not too far out, and with any luck, we will be starting to see a little bit more sunshine in the very near future.
And of course, it's the complete opposite here, but we get a lot of rain in the summer in Brazil. So as we head into autumn, we'll get consistently temperatures of around 30 degrees, but without any rain. So actually, I prefer that.
Well, I don't blame you. I would prefer it too. It's interesting just the way the climate is evolving. And when we're talking about climates, the CX climate is going to be very much in the focus this week on the pod, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. We're picking up on a pod that we did a few weeks ago. Mark Walton, who was talking about work from home and how it's developed to the point where we now need to think about things like health and safety at home. We actually talked this week with Alistair Niederer, who's an old friend. We've both known him for years. He's well known throughout the industry as a C-level executive in a couple of different organizations that we probably all know. But he's now running Needle Rock, which is a CX advisory firm based in London. He's also a non-exec on a company called Blackout that helps work from home security. We sort of picked up on this point again about everybody had this big adventure during the pandemic. At the time, Alistair was at Davies, I think at the start of the pandemic. He was with Davies Consulting. He ended up being locked down for about 6 months in Toronto.
That's right.
And then he came back to Europe to run T-Tech EMEA. So he kind of had some exposure to the BPO world as well as advisory as the pandemic kicked off. And we all saw how the BPOs and how the industry generally changed, especially with the use of work from home. But I think that what's really interesting is Alistair's perspective now on how we need to make it permanent, and he goes on a little bit further on from our previous discussions in talking about the kind of technologies that we now need to be deploying to actually sort of embrace a permanent hybrid world.
Yeah, exactly. And I really don't think there's very many people that come to the table better equipped to have this discussion than Alistair. He is literally an industry veteran, as you mentioned, from both sides of the pond. And while I know that his time in Toronto was frustrating, having been locked down in his apartment, at the same time, it really gave him a good view about what was happening from a North American angle, as well as obviously his tremendous legacy in EMEA. To my mind, I think that he really brings a level of reality and almost a bucket of cold water on those who think we can go back to the good old days. The reality is that somebody like Alistair has a real sense about the need to evolve as CX professionals, the need to evolve the business models, and to make sure that there's a good, steady balance in place, ensuring that the clients or the outsourcers are going to be satisfied, as well as the captive operators in terms of the performance. But the most important factor, the most important element within the centers themselves, the agents, are going to be in a position where they're going to be enthusiastic and want to keep coming back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a good example of this is how you could focus on security inside the contact center by getting everybody to lock away their devices in lockers. Obviously that sort of procedure doesn't work in the work from home environment. So I think that, we all will need to sort of take a more pragmatic view on how do we actually lock down devices when people are sitting at home and they've pretty much got access to anything they want to use.
Yeah, precisely. The whole game has changed. There's been a big shift in how things are done. And this is why, again, I think Alistair is probably one of the best people to speak on this, because he's just got such a legacy and such a background in this regard.
Okay, let's go straight to the interview with Alistair Niederer, focused on the future of work from home. Hi, Alistair. It's great to get you on the podcast again. It's been a while now. No, we've known each other, I mean, since even before I moved from the UK to Brazil. So, and, during that time, you've been at a number of different organizations. So why don't you give us a catch up and let us know what you're up to right now?
Hi, Mark, and thanks for having me along as a guest today. Yes, we have been working together for a number of years, and I think that when I first looked at working with you was very early on the days of social and the impact of social and its impact on CX. So it does go back a long way when I think of what we've been doing. And now I'm at the stage where many years of experience in running operations in CX, both on the digital side and on the human side, and also on the back office side. I think it's given me the opportunity to think very pragmatically about the ways that we should be approaching the levels of service that companies should be providing, whether it's captive or whether it's outsourced, the blends of technology and non-technology, the use of robotics, and the oft discussed use of AI and some of the new technologies which are taking all of the press. So I think it's good sometimes to have somebody who has a bit of a helicopter view or can look at all of the elements, have had experience in a lot of these elements, and give a perspective at least that allows people to think and to look at how they deploy the important resources. But more importantly, what we're seeing is how does it affect people? And that's been probably the biggest shift over the last 2 or 3 years post-pandemic.
Yeah, and when we started talking about getting you back on here again, I think the general theme was work from home and how it's evolved over the past couple of years. But I think that clearly with your experience of operational management and strategy, I think that we're probably going to diverge a little bit from that theme. But I think maybe it's good just to start off with a history lesson, maybe some of your experiences through the pandemic, because I think when it arrived, you were at Davies Consulting, and a few months into the pandemic, you headed up T-Tech Europe. So you must have gone through this whole process of seeing, like up close, how it changed a big BPO in Europe.
Yeah, it has been certainly a pretty interesting adventure. So I probably caught the last BA flight from Heathrow to Toronto with Davies, and to look after the clients that they had, predominantly in the insurance industry, at a point where we all thought that the pandemic was going to last a couple of months. And in effect, I ended up spending 9 months on the 29th floor of a beautiful apartment building in Toronto, which was interesting. But what it gave me a chance to do was to experience the transition from what we would call a client side in my normal CX outsource business and the customer side of the business. So I got very involved in what was capable for a company versus an outsourcer to do. So during that period, it was clear that the pandemic was going to be around a lot longer, and I just felt more comfortable getting back to home base and back to the family. So I took the opportunity to take the role with T-Tech, who were launching their first regionalization with EMEA. And, that was at the latter stages of the pandemic. So all of the very hard work had been done to transition people out to 100% work from home. And I was probably joining at the point when the rubber band was going to come back. And what we saw was, a view that it may eventually settle at 80% of the workforce to be working from home. But what you come to learn is that as an outsourcer, you are working for your client, and those preferences range from 100% in the office to 100% from work from home. So no matter what you want to do, you'll also see that it's driven by the countries you're delivering language from, the technology in those locations, the blend of secure and compliant operations versus more standard customer service query. So yeah, we lived through, and everyone's continuing to live through that, settling down period to say, how is it looking now, and what is that balance like, where we're probably seeing around 50% in the outsource market being a settled down point.
Yeah, and I suppose that as we went into this in 2020, continuing operations was the focus for just about everybody. But at what point did anyone start realizing that this isn't going to be temporary, and we need to think about things like compliance, security, like data security, especially?
Yeah, I think if you're looking from the perspective of the CX outsource community, I think three years prior to the pandemic, I think there had been a huge emphasis on security and compliance and the lack of tolerance, particularly from the BFSI industry, to any slip-ups. And this is in a bricks and mortar environment. So I think that the attention had already been grabbed by companies, and regardless of whether it's work from home or in office, they take it, intensively in terms of what they need to do to make sure that happens. So it was no different from work from home, but you of course then have such a lack of control whilst you're also trying to put in place physical environments, and you're also needing to make sure that you can utilize all technology elements which allow you to have the greatest elements of control in that environment. And I think that's certainly still work in progress, because when you're in a physical environment, you can manage things. But when you're in a remote environment, you have people and their lifestyles and their home environments to consider. And you also have the respect of people, whether you can use cameras and how invasive you need to be. And so what we've seen over that period of time and more are a lot of tools which allow you to monitor what is going on in the home environment, which allow you to then look at things like keyboard tracking to ensure that you've got the right person responding. You can use video where it's possible. You need to look at AI systems which are looking at the time between transactions and see if people are grabbing your full attention when they work. So that there are an awful lot of things that have been put in place. And I think a lot of these things were second nature for people like Live Exchange and Limitless, who were very committed down the BYOD path, the bring your own device path, the security, camera monitoring, keyboard use analysis, two-factor authentication. So much of what has been put in place was actually already in use. And that's just moving to that point. And then looking at the sensitivity around, now that people are allowed back in offices, how much has to be physically in an office versus a work from home environment.
When do you think that we sort of switched over from that hybrid model being an emergency response to this now just becoming normal and a permanent sort of state of affairs then?
I think that's probably been 12 months. I would estimate about 12 months is really, it's now this is the way it's going to be. We now understand, regardless of the amount of negotiations we might have had with our clients as to how we think the best way is to run those operations, that they, through their organizations, have said some things are not negotiable, and this is how it will be. And if you're not keen to operate in that environment, then there are plenty of others who are keen. So yeah, I would think about 12 months ago was that settling down point.
Do you think that a lot of this was worker-led? Because if you read some of the academic studies, if you follow people like Bruce Daisley and his podcast on work, then it seems that it's that experience of a couple of years working at home, and now people don't want to go back to Monday to Friday in the office, or is it also companies actually embracing this option to be more flexible? Certainly if you're talking about companies like Limitless, Live Exchange, I mean, they embraced flexible working hours a long time ago. So the idea of the 8-hour shift, just answering calls all day, seems quite old-fashioned, for these guys.
I think that the companies themselves have, paid a lot of respects to the limitations of the companies who are providing outsourced services in a multi-geographic environment and an omni-channel environment. But by the same token, they have fully respected what is being the voice of the employee. So I've often talked about, for several years, that we must pay as much attention to the voice of the employee as the voice of the customer, and that we must treat all employees and potential employees as individuals and understand their preferences. And what COVID has done has really sharpened that, to say that there are people who, for whatever reason, now have embraced the new norm, which is about the symbiotic relationship from their personal life and their business life. We can't get around the fact that there's the bing bong doorbell going off and there's the dog barking, and I think most people embrace that and say that's just the way it is, and we're tolerant of that. And in a lot of cases, it just shows the human side. You are talking to a human and you're quite comfortable with that. So what you've seen now is that the voice of the employee must be listened to, that companies need to embrace flexible work models. And those flexible work models in an environment where we've got such high inflation and such high costs of energy, such high interest rates, that there are plenty of people who can be providing terrific service who don't want to be A, bricks and mortar, B, full-time, but can offer a work at home or even a combination hybrid model for 20 hours a week, for example. And that's just a section of the group. And these are people who are probably highly skilled, highly experienced, but have a lot to offer, but need to earn money. And so we have to really get away from that fixed model that was always FTE, AHT, FCR, very regimented in what we do. And this gives the opportunity for those servicing the SMEs or those smaller operators who have got a lot of skill and experience to come in and help with that, because it's more difficult if you're one of the very large operators.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because certainly there's flexibility on both sides. It seems to fit the lifestyle of a lot of people who don't want to work 40, 45 hours a week, and it also works for companies that would really like to focus their attention on when they're busiest. So I don't think that we're going back as well. I certainly agree on that. But I think that you mentioned some things like key tracking and videos, and this is stuff that's been quite controversial in the media, especially, the idea that people working at home may be monitored by their employer. So how do we sort of maybe move on from that discussion? What do we really need to do to improve compliance and security in a way that kind of works for everybody?
Yeah, I think that, that smart technology is absolutely the answer. If you think back to the accountants and lawyers over time, with 6-minute billing increments, right? They are reporting their time and they are held to task. So I would expect that generally they wouldn't be able to spend a lot of time Googling things or on their phones or doing other things because they are billing at 6-minute increments. So I don't think it's so dire as we might expect, that people have a responsibility to say, I'm being paid. There's an expectation that I will work for the job. However, my employer understands that I do have a life as well, and I do have my own rights, and I work in my own style. And as we've stepped back from the old service metrics to customer satisfaction metrics, I think there's a lot of leeway to allow the human to be providing their own skills and capabilities, particularly in outbound, where every interaction is a selling opportunity, to be a little bit more flexible about what they do. However, that doesn't include not taking calls or not listening to a customer because you're busy on your mobile. So, those are things that we just know do happen. And when we're expecting people to be paid relatively low amounts, it's a lot to expect. So you need to put in place as many ways to make sure that we respectfully monitor the way things are going, so that we've got the metrics. Everything is really metric these days. And having, one of the things I've recently started working with is a company called Blackout Technologies. And what Blackout have managed to do is create the ability for us on smart devices that, whilst in a particular work environment or at a particular time zone when people are working, that the apps, which are those which might give recording of sensitive data, for example, or give the opportunity to be out there on WhatsApp or TikTok or whatever, the temptation is removed, and that people are just doing what they do. However, we're respecting the fact that they are in a personal environment, in a family environment, and they still need access to receive messages and calls should there be something bad, or probably good, but something happening in their world. So on top of, I guess, voice tracking, keyboard tracking, monitoring through AI, transactions, recording, all the things that we've had over time, you're now seeing these terrific new technologies, which, whilst they may look a little bit onerous, what they're doing is removing the issues and giving security for both sides. So you can't be accused of doing things when you know that you are a good employee. So it's just embracing those smart technologies to make it all work a lot better.
And I guess the equivalent in the bricks and mortar center would be the locker. Like, all of your devices have just got to be locked up. And so then you can't access any of those when you're on the calls. But then that also leaves the kind of anxiety of, like, if you're a parent of young children and you want to stay in touch, you want to make sure that you can get a WhatsApp if there's a problem at the nursery. Then you're basically saying that kind of thing can still get through, but recording and photographs and all that sort of stuff is switched off.
Yeah, I think when you don't have an alternative, then you have to live with what you've got. So if people are using their phones at the workplace and not at the time when they're supposed to be working, then the only alternative has been to put it in a locker. Then you are sure. And, some environments, some countries, you have metal detectors and things like that. But if you're respecting that individual and a technology comes along that gives you a choice, which says, you know what, you don't have to lock it away. There is a thing called nomophobia, which is really the fear of being disconnected from your mobile phone for any length of time. So it's kind of inconceivable looking back to think that you might not have your mobile phone for 8 hours. So this allows you to know that should you be allowed to have incoming text and calls in situations where it's going to be because of an issue or whatever, then that's way preferable. And so this is the sort of stuff that, makes it more pleasant for people who typically have struggled with those jobs and they've been the mundane, to move it up to higher value jobs, more respectful and connected to both work and home life.
And that brings us back to a recent episode where we had Mark Walton from Cloudbase on the podcast, and he was talking about lawsuits that are now arriving from
had to happen, didn't it?
Yeah, eventually.
Hang on a sec. We can probably edit that question out and do it again.
Yeah, I'll just start the question again.
Hopefully she'll stop barking shortly. We're not in any rush, are we?
No, that's fine.
Come on. Get back in there. Mark's got dogs. He understands. Come on.
I got 2 here, yeah.
Do they ever bark? Poppy, come.
They do, but yeah, we've been lucky so far.
Okay, stand by. Come on. We're all huddled, and these days you have to have one room heated. You can't heat your house anymore. You only have one room heated. That's crazy, isn't it? It's like I worked all these years to be stuck in one room.
And then you watch the smart meter go. I saw that they were paying people to not use energy last night for like
we're doing
1 hour
that.
Or something.
4:30 to 6 today. Yesterday was 5. The only thing that was going was the smart meter, the TV and set-top box, and probably the multiple refrigerators. But that's it. That was it. Everything else, we're sitting in darkness. It's like crazy. It's like the new pandemic.
Just gotta use candles. Yeah, that's Britain in 2023. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
All right, let's go back to that one.
Yeah.
That brings us back to a recent episode of the podcast where we had Mark Walton from Cloudbase, and he was talking about lawsuits arriving because employees don't feel looked after at home. Normally that's like a health and safety problem or something like that. But do you think that, combining health, safety with the kind of compliance that you're talking about, you're going to end up with this situation where people just don't feel looked after?
Yeah, it all comes back to respect, and it is a really complex situation. But having spent years in various contact center environments, you do know that in a lot of situations you could do a lot better by the employees. And so whether it's at home or in a center in whatever country you might be, there's often that ability to improve, right? It's not just about the money, it's about the environment, it's about respecting the work that you give people, and make sure that you have provided them the capability to not be just eternally frustrated by not being able to give the answers to those customers who are looking for answers. So I think that what we've seen over this period is that there has had to be a lot of work around how do you adapt those contact center management skills and capabilities and extend them into the home environment, and that you have to look at all of those people elements, all those teams, those things like gamification, creating team environments. You need to try and find a way to, have people fully engaged, provide them with flexible work hours if they choose, removing the mundane, and automating where possible, providing them with those desktop tools and those automation tools which are available to them to enrich how they run their jobs. And what I said before is that you need to treat everybody as individuals. It's not one homogenous mass of people who are at home. It's people who have varying needs. And so people are a very valuable and expensive resource as we go forward, but they are extremely valuable. And so every contact with every customer is an opportunity to sell and to grow and to build the business. So I think it's that perspective. We've often said this is a cost center, and it's all about looking at this as a profit center as part of the business, and show as much respect for your customers by putting in place the right tools and automation tools and self-serve tools, but spend just as much time with making sure the agent is absolutely looked after.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that about the opportunity that's created by having a contact between the company and customer. Because I just shared a story on my LinkedIn recently about the parcel company in the UK that's making it absolutely impossible for people to get in touch with the company when they have questions. And this has even been covered in the mainstream media now as well, because it's just so difficult for anyone to find out how to contact them. And it just seems that this is the approach that companies take when they want to reduce the cost of customer service. But it seems that you're saying there should be more of a focus on the revenue you can gain from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's enough survey to show that people will walk if they don't have a good customer experience. There's enough information to know that, if you can fix a problem or find a solution for somebody, then you will keep that customer for a lot longer. And I think it's very much about understanding that the technology is not the answer. And yes, I did read that article which you posted. And I also looked at some of the survey work that some people had done in terms of saying, have we gone too far with technology? And the answer is yes. We are using technology as that crutch. I think the silos in business are leaning on the hopes of the technology to reduce the cost so that they can do it. But what it's doing is causing more frustration. But the potential is absolutely there, but we're not quite there yet. We have to ease that in as we go along. We need to invest in people to build the business. And I think this is really one of the biggest issues, is ensuring that you have a company whose chief executive and other officers of the company really understand the importance of working across these multiple silos and not leaning too heavily on IT departments versus customer service. So, always with that customer lens and working backwards from there.
Yeah, and that's an old sort of Steve Jobs approach that you look at what the customer wants first and then work backwards. But it seems that if I look at all the customer experience discussion today, everybody's talking about the metaverse and ChatGPT and how, we're finally at the point where digital systems can handle customers as well as humans. So, maybe just to wrap up, could you give us a few thoughts on that and what we might see evolving this year then?
I think what we're seeing is that people have probably had a chance now to take a deep breath and saying that chat can be terrific. In most cases, it's falling short of the mark, that in isolated situations and circumstance, things do work very well with whatever channel you choose, but that you can invest too heavily in the technology until you understand, test it thoroughly, look at best practice and deploy it, because you have the end-to-end situation. It's not just about the chatbot. It's not just about the database. It's about the content. It's about how the rest of your solutions operate. It's as much about your supply chain and your logistics and those issues that then must be fed into either an automated or a person environment. And so I think that you're looking at needing to have people who have experience across all of these areas, who can give sage advice, give pragmatic solutions, and give these technologies a chance to work. I think with ChatGPT, you've seen that already in a short space of time. Those that have got very excited about it then start to realize the limitations. And if you're a customer with one thing to solve and one problem, you can't afford to have those inaccuracies. So there is a lot of work to be done. I think the technology is absolutely the answer, but so is the human in that equation. And the human cannot be replaced in a lot of situations, and certainly in the situations where you want to grow and build that trust and that loyalty with your business, that you need to factor in that asset, which is the human, but in its right proportion.
All right, Alistair, that's a great overview of what's going on this year. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.